That is a bright light. It's a pleasure to be here, and a little bit about me. My background is I was thinking about it this morning, is in human development, course development, software development, as well as experiential education, and e-learning design and development. And so we're going to pull all this together in 7 minutes and see how we get through it, where I'm able to talk and share with you my ideas about rapid e-learning and whether or not your organization is really embracing and adopting it, and what your culture might look like to do so. Before I get into the presentation, let me ask you first to just fold your hands, if you will. Now, who has their right thumb over their left thumb? Put your hands up, okay? And who has your left thumb over your right thumb? Okay, larger majority. Who's right? No one's no one's really right, but don't we always feel like we were taught to have one right answer? Now take your hands and fold them the other way. How does it feel? Weird. Ew, right? Strange, uncomfortable. Change, right? Change is always uncomfortable. Well, for the purposes of this presentation, right now I sort of feel like there are two constants in life. One is gravity. What does gravity define? But it determines where we are in life at any given time. Right now, I am right here on this stage presenting to you. But at any point in time, in the next 7 minutes, something could happen. The fire alarm could go off. Somebody could throw a tomato. Anything could happen. Laura will stand up, and I will have to respond to that change. And as we know, change is also constant. And what I've discovered, though, also is, as we all know, we are learning organisms. And as learning organisms, we are going to need to respond to change in order to survive. And so what does that really require of us? But it requires that we be adaptive and agile. Now, as I look at this and as I work with organizations, I stop to ask, how are organizations choosing to be truly agile? And as Lord Putnam said yesterday, how are they choosing to look at change as an opportunity, not a threat? So what we see is, in being agile and being adaptive, really what it requires is being able to access knowledge and information when we need it to be able to respond most effectively. So is it any surprise that rapid technologies, learning technologies, have come along? Because we are bombarded with so much change now, way more than we ever were. And we are having to put out information and bits of knowledge that help people be able to embrace all this so much more rapidly, right? So now we have all these tools. And more tools keep popping up every single year. Every time we come to this conference, we're getting a chance to learn more and more about all the different tools, to the point where we're having to ask, oh, good God, which one do I use now? Right? So it gets to be a little bit overwhelming, even just managing that kind of change. But we do need to turn to these tools. Now, when you look at the traditional e-learning approach, what we see there are these normal phases to produce a 30-minute module, roughly. eLearnity has come out with some research, and if you are not familiar with their white papers, they're an excellent source for better understanding traditional as well as rapid e-learning. But what we've got for a traditional approach, we've got these 7 different stages: scoping, procurement, design, development, testing, deployment, and evaluation. To run through them takes about 16 weeks. What I've also found is that traditionally learning requires a traditional waterfall approach, or often is what we go through. So we have the HR learning team identifies, receives some requests for learning. They then produce a conceptualization document or a scoping document. A project manager is then assigned to oversee and track the progress. SMEs are appointed to be part of the project. Scripts and storyboards are written, and then iterative builds come along. In my experience, nod or raise your hand if you've also found this too, a lot of times a project manager ends up being sort of the gatekeeper on this. Nod, yes. And how much access do you actually get to your subject matter experts? Little, right? Or not nearly as much as you need. And so what I've actually found to be kind of ironic is that when it comes to producing things rapidly, what's happening is actually we're just going through this process rapidly. Are we actually using rapid technology and learning technology to produce what we need to? And so I'd say here, a rapid e-learning approach, what they're saying now is you ought to be able to condense this so that you have these phases and you're able to produce, a 30 or 20-minute module in 3 weeks. And well, that's wonderful if you can do it using a slightly different approach. Otherwise, what I found with the waterfall process, basically, you might be doing it in 3 weeks, but you're still going through an awful lot of managerial controls in order to get to your final output. What I'd say is the real power of rapid comes in when you begin to wed it with a different kind of process, one that is called agile. Agile actually stems from software development, and it's got a couple of characteristics that are different than waterfall development. First, you really build something based on what the learner actually needs. So it's not coming from some HR request, it's not coming from some L&D request, but basically what you've identified, as mentioned before, you've got those who are high performers in your organization. Those are the ones who are often answering the questions, the same with the subject matter experts, and they're instead identifying what really needs to be developed. They've also been exposed to either the tool that you might have, or they're willing to learn what they need to learn to be able to put out content. Also, the difference in focus is that you really run a project that the team can succeed at. And it's more successful because what you've done is you've identified that you're going to produce content around just a given issue, a given matter, a given topic that needs to be learned specifically. You're also going to build something on task and on purpose. The other thing that's different, too, is the team is generally self-organizing and self-defining. So you might have a group of 4 people who say, we need to get something together on this and produce it, versus having a project manager who goes and finds the people, who decides who's going to be part of this, and then they organize all the steps and processes and they report back. You take out of the whole process a lot of the managerial oversight, if you will, that I find just tends to get a little bit in the way as I'm working with clients. So it's a different focus to move away from waterfall and more towards agile. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, though, we have change, obviously, right? And if you look at change, basically, in Leadership on the Line, Linsky and Heifetz, one of the things they mention is that too much change can either cause chaos or too much loss. And we can only respond and appreciate change if it's somehow also contained. What's the environment? Because basically you can have water thrown all over the place, or if a drop of water is falling into, a pitcher, now you can really do something with it. And so what I've begun to do is ask myself, well, what does an organization need to have in place to be able to effectively manage itself? And now I've turned to Douglas McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Anyone familiar with Douglas McGregor's work? Great. So he was one of the founding faculty members of the Sloan School of Management at MIT. And essentially look at your organization and ask yourselves where you fall. Theory X is an organization that basically says, you know what, the average person dislikes work. They're always going to respond best more to punishments than rewards. And they prefer to be directed versus take responsibility. Theory Y, on the other hand, is really quite opposite. It says work is as natural. The effort for work is just as natural as play. We have a natural inquiry, and sense about ourselves, that we're committed to projects and that we want to seek out responsibility, and that we also have a high degree of imagination and ingenuity, and obviously innovation that we're going to tap into. Now, what I've begun to do is really assess, when I'm working with organizations, where do they fall on this scheme? And it's been my experience, those who are more on the Theory X side will definitely want a waterfall process. Those who are more on the Theory Y side are much more open to agile. And it makes a complete difference in terms of how the e-learning modules get produced and really what the output ends up being. And I can talk more about case studies as it relates, but Laura already stood up, and those 7 minutes went by really fast. So basically, for rapid e-learning, your checklist is Can you produce a functional tool that users actually need? Are the SMEs available, on board, invested, accessible in an agile kind of way? Are they open to iterative developments? And does your organization ascribe to theory? Why?
That's great. Margaret, that's fantastic. But I'd like to ask you about a specific example,
Sure.
if I may, because I think there were a couple of things that came up before